Flynt Leverett, did you have something to add to your side?
Yes, it is possible to make that separation. It actually works in the real world. One of the few things I did in my service at the Bush White House, of which I am unreservedly proud, is that I drafted the letter that President Bush sent to President Mubarak in 2002 regarding the detention of Saadetdin Ibrahim, the scholar
advocate in Egypt.
And basically the tack we took in that letter was we were at that point discussing the possibility of additional aid to Egypt beyond what Egypt was already receiving. And we simply said in the letter, you know, you're doing this to Saad has made it impossible for us to move ahead with any kind of initiative like this. We also said in the letter, you know, existing aid and our strategic cooperation, you know, we hope will go on. But we sent the signal that you can't get more, and we can't get more, and in the end, Saad was released in pretty short order after that letter was sent, because
but the offense that you were addressing, Flynt, was he's in jail. You weren't saying we want to adopt his reform agenda for democracy.
No, we were saying we want him out of jail.
Could I respond on that? What Flynt has described is accurate, and it is a terrific example of how the U.S. promotes democracy. It is one of the tools to use. Saadetdin was in jail because he had been a threat to the regime, because he'd supposedly written an article about the succession in Egypt. He'd written things the regime did not appreciate. He was imprisoned. He was a prisoner of conscience. And at some point, from the perspective of U.S. policy, it became unacceptable to us. And we said to the Mubarak regime, we will no longer continue this level of aid. We will consider future levels of aid at risk.
No, we would continue the present level.
Right. We will consider future levels of aid at risk if you go down this path, and potentially in following years, additional amounts would be at risk.
No,
at the same time, Flynt,
Yeah.
I was also there, but let me finish. I gave you a chance. At the same time, we said to the government of Egypt, we're going to take part of the assistance that we are already giving you, and we are going to set it aside for democracy promotion activities. And we are going to fund activities that you may or may not agree with us on. We are not going to ask your approval every time we provide assistance to a women's rights organization or to a political organization. We're going to be promoting democracy. We would rather do this hand in hand. We would rather find ways that we can work together, but it's U.S. taxpayers' money, and we want to see it spent in the cause of freedom. So I think it's important to note that this is just one example of the kinds of tools we use to effectively help to support the spread of freedom.
Danielle, Pletka.
I think it's also important, and it's a little bit unfair perhaps, but it is important to bear a little bit of witness to what Saadetdin Ibrahim has done since he was released from prison with the good offices of Flynt, Liz, and other folks in the Bush administration, and that is that he has been an untiring and extraordinarily annoying to the Mubarak regime voice for change, for reform, and he said to the President of the United States in the presence of Natan and others at a recent conference in Prague, why do you not do more? Why do you not stand up for us? Now, that's not the three of us or the three of you. That is a reformer in the Middle East who's calling upon us to use our power, and I think that that is what we need to reflect,
Dimitri,
those voices.
When I hear this argument that we should criticize every government we disagree with in terms of their domestic practices, I want to ask people in the audience before they vote to ask themselves, when was the last time you assaulted, even if rhetorically, your business partners? When, if you are a lawyer, when was the last time you told a judge that he was a jerk? When you came to school where your children study and told the principal that you had no confidence in them? You know what? If you have to work with people, not because you appointed them, not because you selected them, but because you need to work with them, you have to know when to stop. You don't need to praise them artificially. You do not need to pretend like President Bush did that President Putin had a wonderful pro-democracy soul. But you do understand that if you need Egypt, if you need the Saudis to help you with the Middle East peace process, to create an impression that you are trying to overthrow their governments, well, you know, it's a little inconsistent. It is counterproductive. And I think, like with every good thing, you need to know when to stop. And the Bush administration did not know and still does not know when to stop.
I need to say one thing in response to that, though, and I know Natan wants to answer too. 9/11 changed that. After September 11th, we were very clearly in a situation where it wasn't us talking to our children's teacher. It was us saying to governments in the region, conditions inside your countries have become a national security challenge, threat, concern for us. It's not us saying that we are going to impose democracy, saying that we're going to invade every country in the Middle East, as are some of the straw men that are held up, but much more us saying, look, we are threatened by the conditions in your country. We are threatened as a nation because your children are living in despair, because your children have no hope, because they can't speak, because they go to schools where they're teaching hatred and violence and intolerance. Those things are not sort of your concerns, which have no impact on us. And anybody who lived through 9/11 and has thought about the fact that that danger came here to our shores, primarily from countries in that region which are not allowing freedom for their people, you have to understand that their freedom is not just right, but it's a national security interest for the United States.
Shibley Telhami has the last word of this exchange.
What Liz has just said is actually rather revealing, because I think that's an argument about not democracy as an end in itself, but as an instrument to American security. It's
absolutely both.
You know, you can't have it both ways. And I think if this is the tack that was taken, this is part of the problem. You have to make an evaluation. Has it served our security? Even if you don't make a judgment about democracy, in the same way that we did have, I think many people in the American political mainstream came to believe that somehow terrorism is a function of the absence of democracy. First of all, scholars don't agree on that necessarily, but let's assume that that was the case. Then you have to make an assessment whether we have more terrorism or less terrorism as a consequence of the policy that we have undertaken. And I think everybody could look now and make an assessment on where we are in the Middle East. There's no doubt that there is more al-Qaeda in the Middle East than there was before. In the Arab world, certainly. There is more terrorism in the Middle East than before. So it hasn't worked with our national security, and it is being, in a way, argued both as an end in itself, as an instrument of security, when in fact, even the scholars who believe it's possible to do it believe that it'll take years to do, and in the meanwhile, all you have is instability. And what instability is correlated with is more terrorism. And that is why we can't have it both ways. So when Hamas gets elected, you're stuck. You don't know what to do. That's the problem.
Natan Sharansky is going to make a liar of me and insist on having the last word in this.
No, I want only to react on the jokes of Mr. Simmons, because they sounded for me like kind of deja vu, and I understood why. Because they are exactly those arguments of those who were explaining to us why Soviet Union should not be called evil empire, why Soviet Union should not be restricted in its trade with the United States, why should not be massive demonstrations for Soviet Jews when Soviet officials are coming. If these jokes were heard then, and they were very strong, if they were listened to them, I would still be in prison.
There's a question from
the United States. One of the first things I did was to become a secretary of the advisory board of the Union of Councils for Soviet Jews. And I was a strong supporter of the Jackson-Vanik Amendment. There is absolutely no contradiction between helping people like Mr. Sharansky, who is a genuine hero and whose courage I greatly admire, and also understanding some practical interests. Ronald Reagan called the Soviet Union an evil empire. Ronald Reagan also, immediately after his assassination, wrote a handwritten letter to Leonid Brezhnev, suggesting that they should find a way to work together. You need to find the balance. The Bush administration doesn't know how to do it.